1871, and Fred was also born in 1871, so I think they were twins. One of the occupational hazards of stonemasonry is silicosis, a chronic lung disease caused by the scarring of lung tissue from breathing in the sharp microscopic grains of the stone. There is no cure. Because Fritz and Marie Lindros suddenly moved in 1872 to purchase a farm near Clayton Center, Iowa, I'm left to wonder if he realized his health was compromised after only 3 years of work as a stonemason, or had he simply observed the disease and fellow longtime stonemasons. In order to purchase his farm, Fritz continued working as a stonemason in Iowa, and more children arrived, the fourth William in 1874. And then the Linders moved again for a job, this time to somewhere in Quebec, Canada, where Fritz was still working as a stonemason on a project, and the fifth child was born during this period in Canada. My great-grandfather, Frank, was born in 1875. At the age of 33, the Fred Linders returned to their farm in Iowa, where the sixth child, George, was born in 1877. And the lung symptoms of silicosis are beginning for Fritz. Caroline, the seventh child, arrived in 1878. Fritz is now starting to become seriously ill. The family is struggling financially. His wife, Marie Buter Lindroth, disappears from the written records after Caroline is born. Did she die in childbirth? Later, from accident or disease? I can find no records of her death. At 37 years old, Fred Linder remarries with Marie Dorothea Baber. A year later, the eighth child, Joanna, is born in November of 1882. An eighth child, Fritz can only struggle to feed and clothe, and Marie Bember dies, perhaps from childbirth or later from disease. Again, I could find no records of her death, but most certainly she's gone before 1885. The census records of 1885 list Frederick Lindroth as a widower with only 4 children in the family home. Frank, age 9, that's my grandfather. George is 7, Lena is 5, and Anna is 2. My ancestor, Frank, will be gone before the year is out. But where are these children going? Times were very unhappy for the Lindroth children, both before and after the death of their mother and stepmother. Desperate to feed his children, Fritz Lindroth begins apprenticing any child he deems old enough to work out to the local farmers. My great-grandfather stated he was apprenticed at the age of 8 after completing the 2nd grade in school. Part of the agreement was the children were supposed to be educated through the 8th grade before being required to work full-time as a farmhand. Sadly, that agreement was ignored, and Frank's World War I draft card stated he had only completed the 2nd grade level. Later in the 1925 census, Frank stated he could read to the 7th grade level. I believe that my great-grandmother, Lucy, may have tutored him. In September of 1884, Fritz Lindroth became a naturalized citizen. By now, the lung disease is becoming more advanced. Perhaps he hoped that being a citizen would be of some benefit to him in obtaining help in his circumstances. Fritz Lindroth is now 44 years old and slowly dying of his disease. He is unable to work. Having applied for financial help with the Reed Township trustees, they declined his request for financial assistance, but did order $10 a month to be paid from June to October of 1888 to Mrs. J.F. Hayden, who was caring for the 6-year-old Anna. Unbelievably, after the denial of his application for assistance, Fritz Lindroth marries for the 3rd and final time to Mary Ann Whitcomb. He probably needed assistance just for his daily needs, but she too disappears from the records by the next census, and Fritz is listed as living in the household along with only my great-grandfather Frank, who is 20, and his younger brother George, who is 18. Both have probably aged out of their apprenticeships by this time. I think they were there to help their father however they could at this point. Fritz is 51 years old. 5 years later, in 1900, the farm is gone, probably sold or foreclosed, and Frederick Lindroth is listed as being an inmate of the Clayton County Poor Farm at 56 years of age and as a widower. In 1904, he passes away at the Poor Farm, is buried in an unmarked grave with a death certificate listing heart failure as a cause of death. A tragic life mercifully ended. And where was Frank at this point? The 1900 census lists him age 25 as a farm laborer and boarder working on the widow Anna Paulus farm. And my great-grandmother, Lucy Paulus, age 17, is also listed. They will marry in February 1901 in Clayton Center, Iowa. They move a short distance to Garner-Billow and stay on a farm there for 3 years. Their first child, Florence, was born in 1902 in Farmersburg Township, which is where the farm of Lucy's stepmother, Anna Paulus, is located. I believe that Lucy went there to have her first child. In 1904, the young Frank Lindroth family moved to a 100-acre farm south of Iowa. There, my grandmother, Irene, joined the family in April. They lived there until 1919 on what was known as the old Shearholtz farm. 2 boys joined the family, Myron in 1910 and Efford in 1916. About 1920, apparently restless, and with Lindroth relatives who were also moving to a new area near Mercedes, Texas, Frank decided the family needed to sell their Iowa farm and use the proceeds to purchase land along the Rio Grande River. Heavily promoted to Midwestern farmers as future grapefruit farms, these irrigations along the Rio Grande River west of Brownsville, Texas, ranged from legitimate districts who oversold the water to outright fraudulent schemes. Disaster is looming. On October 20th, in 1920, Frank Lindroth had a farm sale, selling all his livestock and equipment. The newspaper states he will leave immediately to look after his farm interests in Texas. Lucy and the children moved over the Dolden store until school ends next semester. On the 25th of November, another article stated, due to bad weather, the Lindroth family does not leave for Texas until now. Mrs. Lindroth and the 2 boys leave with Frank, while the 2 older girls stay with their Uncle George. Frank is 45 years old at this point. It's January 13th, 1921, a mere 3 months after their arrival in Texas. The Alcata Register states, Mrs. Lindroth and the 2 boys are back in Rowena, returning from Texas. Frank is not with them. After being fleeced by the land company, it became clear no irrigation water was arriving anytime soon for their 20-acre farm, and the land was currently worthless. Frank had just enough money to purchase train tickets for Lucy and the 2 boys. He was stranded in Texas, looking for work so he too could go back to Iowa. From prosperous Iowa farmer to flat-ass broke Texas landowner. Fortunately, Frank was able to contract to move a church, which would clear just enough money to get him back to Iowa. After hiring 3 Mexican workers, buying any necessary tools, and renting the rest, Frank set to work. He told my Uncle Wayne it was not an easy job. Whenever he told his workers to do something like go and get a hammer, all 3 would go to do the simple task. He had to explain to them that only 1 person needed to do that task, and the other 2 should remain on the job to do whatever they were currently working on. I believe a language barrier presented a problem for them. But Frank persevered, finally got the church moved, and had the funds he needed to go home. The family is now back in Iowa, but what to do to earn a living? In July of 1921, the Lindroths purchased the Rowena grocery. But where did this money come from? I suspect Lucy's stepmother, Anna Paulus, provided whatever funds were necessary to purchase the store. The store did manage to make enough money for them to barely eke out a living during the Great Depression that started 8 years after they purchased the grocery. Surprisingly, in 1926, Frank signed a warranty deed mortgage on the 28-acre lot in Texas with a down payment of $3,150 on a total debt of $6,307. Water was about to arrive, and the small grapefruit farm was not worthless anymore. But it took 4 years for that water to arrive, and Frank finally sold the farm in April 1930. I don't know if he sold it for enough to recoup his investment, but since it was only 6 months after the Wall Street crash of 1929, I doubt it was sold for very much. In 1939, Frank and Lucy sold the grocery. Frank, who was 61, had built them a small two-story house almost right across the street from the grocery store. But Frank did not really retire. The 1940 census lists his occupation as carpenter and that he worked for 16 weeks and made $380. He continued working as long as he was able. Wayne said he made birdhouses and sold them and was also the caretaker for the Lutheran Church in Luena. Once he told my uncle, "If you ever need a hand, look no further than the end of your sleeves." Certainly something Frank Lindroth lived by. When he was 78, his wife Lucy, aged 70, died. Frank passed on 4 years later in 1958 when I was 7 years old. I remember him on his front porch in his rocking chair, smiling at the family gatherings. In 1920, Luena had a population of 181. By 1940, it had 204 persons. Of those two decades, 11 were during the Great Depression. The Iowa economy crashed, and Frank and Lucy struggled to keep the store stocked during those years. But during one of those rough years, they were able to offer Red Wing advertising goals to their customers. And I think that is a testament to Frank's work ethic and perseverance in the face of really hard times in their lives.
Really hard times.
So that was my story.
My mother had a Red Wing crock, a 5-gallon Red Wing crock.
My mother was obsessed with Red Wing pottery as a child. So it was very, very popular in Northeast Iowa to have Red Wing pottery.
At one time, I had a 2-gallon crock of Red Wing pottery.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's kind of cool that it actually has your family name in it.
Yeah, that's what they did in the
That's
advertising
that's
goals.
really
And
great.
it says, mix with us and save
Save
some dough.
That's funny.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
And it's got his name, F.H. Lindroth, Luena, Iowa, in it.
So comments about specifics that you heard in this that you could react to. What were some things that you?
Seems like, the coming of the kids. I mean, that whole pacing of
Yeah,
then this one, and then this one, and then this one. I mean, holy mackerel! And at the same time they were gathering kids, his health was going down, and you're just going, oh,
yeah, it's like, stop already.
enough is enough. Yeah.
So, but I think because Frank and George went back to help their dad, that he wasn't mean to him or anything, and they understood that he was in this really poor health. That's why they got apprenticed out. Frank just wasn't the kind of person I think that would have held that against his dad. A lot of people probably would have.
I don't know that I would say, from what I know of that era, it was not uncommon for really hard expectations of kids. I was thinking about the fact that when my dad was 11 years old, and his brother was 9, their dad took them with one band of sheep and a sheep herder with another band of sheep. They went up the canyon. They went up basically almost to where you can see the end of the bighorns from up there when you're just before you get to the Pod Peak, or the pass. And you can look on that. There's great big basins out there that you
Right.
pointed them that direction. Well, actually, basically took them to Hazelton and said, "See that spot over there? That's where you go, and the guy that we're leasing from should be over there to meet you. Here's a sheep wagon, 2 horses, a dog." And then the other sheep herder, he took the other set of band of sheep, and they went on down towards Tensley. Those boys were up on the mountain all by themselves all summer. And he said, "Well, I'll see you about the 4th of July and bring you some more grub."
Yeah, they must have gone down Rome Hill Road.
Yeah, well, up in that general
Yeah.
vicinity. So the thing I notice is that the expectations of kids of that generation was just, that was the way it happened. And then another time he talked about the fact that when he was 10 years old, his dad, they were wrangling a lot of the wild horses that were ruining the country. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. So they were wrangling these gathering these horses, and they roped the lead horse, threw my dad's saddle on it. He said, "Hang on," and he said, "Don't get bucked up." And he led the horses, and they drove the horses into the corrals down at our ranch. And Dad, just as a 10-year-old, is sitting there holding the horn and riding with those horses and steering. Basically, he was the one that rode those horses into the corral.
Yeah.
He said it takes a lot of guts to move wild horses, and I mean, that was what you did with kids. That lifestyle was just the norm.
Didn't have a choice.
You didn't have a choice. So I didn't see the hardship in the same way as I, might have if I were in the next generation up. I just think it was that.
Yeah,
was what
to
happened.
me, it was just unthinkable. You would apprentice out an 8-year-old to do full-time farm work.
Yeah, but I think that wasn't really all that big. I mean, and I remember when I was down someplace in New Mexico, they had a CCC camp down in the east side of the state of Arizona. And the kids that were sent there were anywhere from 10 to 14, 15 years old during the Depression.
Wow.
Those kids did not have an education, and they were completely illiterate. And one of the things that the CCCs did,
Was educated.
they paid them $13 a month, and the kids were expected to send the $13 home. They fed them, they clothed them, and in that particular case, they taught those kids to read. They didn't do it here because the education was a little bit better up, but those kids all came from the South. I think it's just a generation of that was so hard in those years that that didn't surprise, I guess that didn't shock me in the same way as some other things do.
My mother said she graduated from the 8th grade, but she said she sat down and counted the number of days that she had been in school. And if she'd gone every day, she would have gotten through the 2nd grade. And she said she could figure math faster than her 8th grade
Yeah.
teacher.
Wow.
Yeah, they could column it. They would run their fingers and do a column, and they could add it in their head, and they could get to the column absolutely dead on. And they were great spellers. So I'm blurting out. So what were some other things besides the children working? What else did you notice about the story as she was telling you?
Moving around, lots of movement because of jobs, because of need.
I was impressed by where you found all your information.
Okay,
Your
right.
family's happy about
I
that.
corresponded with my Uncle Wayne, who was Frank's grandson. And they lived in the same town of Luena. And Wayne practically lived at their house and spent all this time with Frank. And Wayne told me all about this. And I probably did that for 2 years before he passed away. And he sent me like the family photographs and everything because he knew that I would share with all my cousins and everything. And so especially this Texas thing, I had no idea that happened. And I got all this information from my Uncle Wayne, which was firsthand from Frank.
Well, I'm going to ask one question. As you were listening to this, did you get confused
No.
a little bit? Or-
Yeah, totally.
Okay, and what was the part that was confusing for you, Jane?
Well, the wives, couldn't keep track of who was, married to who. and
Yeah, the
when.
names. Anybody else find that confusing?
Good documentation for a family history and recovering several generations.
Yes.
And covering several generations like that, it's easy to get bogged down without rereading and hearing
Yes.
it more than once. So,
I was,
There's a lot there.
there is, which is why I would really like you to, consider this as being a kind of the heart of your work. That maybe, I don't know whether this is what you wanted to do, but this is really, as he said, this is covering a lot of your family history
Yeah,
a
the
really
most-
compressed way.
Most of this came from my Uncle Wayne, and the rest of the family doesn't even know about it yet.
So this was my suggestion in this case, and as a writer. I would like you to at least consider this. I'm not telling anybody how they want to write it. You can do it whenever you want. But to me, this particular, it was prompted by the heirloom.
Mhm.
But the heirloom didn't play a huge role in the whole of this. But what I would think might help, just even for your own family, especially younger generations who don't necessarily know all the names of everyone. If you, and I looked at a possible way of structuring it where you kind of do a first framework of sequencing and organizing the family and the people, who they were in relationship to each other.
I thought I could do that simply by printing out the family tree.
Well, but I think if you're putting this in the story, then the places and the historical elements, which is going to be what you're going, and then focusing on that bowl in light of the story of the grocery store and what happened with the Dust Bowl and or the Depression. But what I thought would be helpful is in those places where you are describing the people, to be really clear about the original, is it Fritz?
Yeah,
The
Fritz
original.
is the
original
great
family.
great grandfather.
And he is the great-great-grandfather, and he has 3 wives. And so to structure it possibly with a sort of, at least at the very beginning, a summary paragraph that says Fritz came from Germany, was married 3 times, and these are the names of the wives. Without necessarily filling in all the blanks of what happened with them, and then bring it into and then fill in the story, because that kind of serves as a topic sentence, if you will, of the whole.
Okay,
And then you go into the descriptions of what happens with those families, the blended family side of it. Because what I began to I finally realized that, because I was getting Fritz and Frank a bit confused. Your identities, if you identified the original as the great-great-grandfather, and then give them the name of Grandfather Frank or Uncle Wayne, only because your immediate family might know who these people are. But as the generations move away, as your family expands and your families get bigger, it's harder to keep track of all of these people when you don't really have the connections. Like you said, there's a lot of your family that doesn't know any of this story. So
Yeah.
that kind of, for example, and I use this because my dad's father's name, his grandfather's name was John Randall Smith. But then there was Alfred Marion Smith, and then there was Alfred Lothian Smith, and then there was Alfred Bullard Smith. And then there was my father's brother, Robert Smith, but my great aunt, Omi, was married to a Bob Smith who was shot in the back down behind the hole in the wall. You get 2 Roberts, you get 3 Als, 2 Margarets. Well, actually, there were 6 Margarets in our family. By the time you get done, you have so many people with so many names that it becomes somewhat harder to keep track of the story.
That's where the family tree comes in.
And the family tree
A
helps.
visual
Is very, very
representation,
helpful.
yeah.
But if you can identify the names, like there are Uncle Wayne and Uncle Charlie and Uncle Frank and Uncle, however you do it. But those original, that clarification of relationships can help the reader follow along. And the other thing that I noted in this is a lot of this is in present tense as she is writing it. I think I would suggest, now this is a stylistic decision, but the past tense can help kind of chronologically keep things going. So as these things are happening, then if you personally want to insert a narrative that includes your first person observations, those questions that you pose, that could be in present tense. But the other questions or the other narrative portion, if it's in past tense, that's strictly stylistic, and that's a decision that any individual makes for themselves. But I think that the personal narrative can and should be in the first person and in present tense, wondering these things as you're kind of pondering it. But that changes the tone every time you do that. Every time a person inserts a wondering a question, what happened to this person? That shifts the tone, it shifts the mood of the piece. And so, by shifting voice and those things, it's a stylistic choice. It's strictly stylistic, but that's just something to think about. But I thought it was really, I think it's a really important anchor piece for your whole family. And then this almost deserves its own like mini story in the context of that store. But I think that story about the Texas duping, the whole
Yeah.
scam, that's another little mini story of its own. I think you could almost separate them into multiple pieces.
Well, I could just end it when the first Fritz dies, and then start over with what happened with Frank.
But I think it's
Or a
it's
second
kinda like,
chapter.
it's almost
Yeah.
like part one, part two.
Two, yeah, I could do that as a part one, part.
I mean,
Well,
that's-
and then like at the beginning of my part one, I could give just Fritz married to the 3 wives and who the children were, the 8 children. And that's all you'd have to have separated out. Then part 2 is my great grandfather Frank and his 1 wife and the 4 children. And then that Uncle Wayne is the son of Irene that I
yeah,
mentioned, so.
and I thought that was just, so it clarifies relationships.
And I will do that. I'm gonna insert that. I think that's a really, really good idea, so you don't get so confused, because my cousins will all know who these people are because they're my age and like they knew Frank like I knew Frank briefly as a small child. But their grandchildren aren't gonna know who that
Right.
is.
Yeah. And
Right.
and I think that if you accompany it, just like you have these photographs of your great grandparents and grandparents, the diagram of your family tree is a separate item, but it goes very nicely in right here. I think you could do both. I will only mention this just to you, Meredith, but I saw in the photographs that you sent me, the article that you have is upside down.
I know, because I had to fit it in a certain space, and they're only there as a placeholder to remind me before I turn them in.
Okay.
I have to call those up on my computer and re-edit them all, make them smaller and fit them in.
Okay, I think maybe, I wasn't sure if that was an accident, because and then there's a little thumbnail.
Catch your attention if it's.
Yeah, and there's a little thumbnail of those things up in this tiny corner up there above the picture of the wedding picture. I'm like,
Yeah.
what is that? So I clicked on it, then I enlarged it, and then I put it on a separate page,
Oh,
because I thought, what is that?
so, but yeah,
It's literally-
the pictures are just placeholders for
Yeah.
me to remind me before I submit it to Denica as my final. I gotta re-edit all those photos, get them to the correct DPI so that they print well
Okay,
and make them smaller too.
okay.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, I'm not trying to be nitpicky, and I don't want to be, like, I'm not trying to crowd anybody into a certain corner as far as the way you write. I just, I am conscious of having done some editing for, like, these historical pieces, and it does help if people are clear on who is who. What's the relationship? I mean, I certainly have run into that with my own writing.
And where Frank's, all 3 of his wives died.
I wondered about that.
Yeah,
Nobody knew
and I
how.
think he was literally working them to death.
Oh, geez.
I wondered that too, because there's no,
Yeah, there's no explanation for what happened to them.
they were
Well, I
gone.
can't find their death records. They
Well,
just
it's hard
they
to find
disappear.
last names, main names.
Yeah, they
you know,
disappear off
back
the
then.
census records, and he's listed as a widower, so I know they died. That's how I know.
They didn't necessarily always do obituaries. And the other thing is, depending on the year, when it happened, first of all, depending on where they were, they might have died in childbirth, because there were so many babies.
Yeah,
And infection was not, and that was one of the big problems. It depended on, they died from infections.
I found hints that the first wife may have died from an accident.
Hmm.
And I need to just really get into the records and explore that further to see if I can find any reference to what type of accident.
There's the great big house that Karen and Tim Blaney have out here north of. Well, it was originally built by a man by the name of Redmond. And Redmond was one of the well-to-do people in the community. And I found an article that was talking about Mrs. Redmond. There was not one mention of her first name. It
Yeah,
was Mrs. Redmond.
all the time.
Well, not as often, as she was mentioned like 4 times in newspapers through her social life and all the stuff that they did. Not one time does her first name ever appear. It was just- And I mean, that's who she was. So she was
They say, usually you say Mrs. George or.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
they didn't even have his first
Yep.
name. It was just the initials of his initials and Mrs. Redmond. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it's hard to find people even 4 or 5 generations
Oh.
ago, even with my mom's into genealogy, but finding last names, just tough.
So, let's go to who wants to read next, and I'll just make a note of who is next. So we've got about another half an hour. Jim, do you want to read? Or Sam or Dave?
Mine's really long and we could wait till last for me.
Okay, but if it's really long and it's something that you want, if you don't want to share the next one and you want to read the one that we're reading now, I'm really okay with that. It's fine. If you just want to, save it and we read it, whatever order you want to do it. So it's up to you. If you have let me just ask this question. What was your heirloom?
It's a bug that my dad bought, brand new car in 1958. and
Oh.
We all learned to drive on it. Just turned into like a piece, everybody in the family, even cousins know the car.
Yeah.
What color was it?
Black,
Okay.
and it was a sunroof bug. It was kind of a big deal, but
Okay.
to us.
Dave, what was yours?
Mine was Grandma's mysterious China cabinet.
Oh, the
which
china cabinet was full of
It
stuff.
was a half moon shape, solid, very thin glass, curved glass all the way around there with no supports. You had to be extremely careful in opening it. The hinges were very, very delicate. It was, as nearest we can tell, it came about sometime in the 18th century. 1800s in Sweden.
Wow.
Grandma and Grandpa were immigrants, met on the boat, getting off the boat in Chicago at the age of 16, and decided that the American adventure was better done together. Because going through the citizenship process, learning English, and then struggling through a very, very small one-room apartment in Chicago.
Wow, and then to have it
And then,
touched like that.
Then moving out eventually to the further suburbs, and the china cabinet was always mom's point of view was always don't touch it, and Grandma always said don't take the key out of the lock, because the key was very, very tiny and very intricate and could never ever be replaced.
All right, so we have 2 family histories tied to an object. I mean, you're telling a whole story of a family, just like Meredith's did. I mean, it comes down to some of that becomes, these prompts, or these projects, these assignments, whatever you want to call them, are simply an avenue into the story. And so if you do develop something and it doesn't match what they're a little great on this. So it's just a case of incorporate it. And that story of your family says, that touch, that china cabinet is directly tied to your family history. So, I mean, it's much like this bowl. It's really
At the
interesting.
end, I do go into great detail of
What was in it?
the fact that it was very, very old rosewood, with intricate the size dimensions, and then what the mysterious treasures were inside.
So, I mean, you've got, that's a whole book.
Yeah, that's the cabinet, yeah.
So what about you, Lois?
I used a Christmas bell that was musical and was an irritant throughout our Christmases. It was given by my aunt, and then we kept pulling the string on it. So
Oh, and then it would ring and
it
sing all the
would
way.
sing, incessantly. And it got hidden away.
By your mom.
Well, that's not for sure. Well, we don't know what happened to it.
So you never found where?
Oh, it came back again, but we don't know why.
That's fun.
That's another mystery, but yeah, that's.
Kind of like Chucky the Doll, it had a life of its own.
And so what about you, Jim? What did you write about? And I'm gonna probably have one of you read anyway, but just, what did you write about?
It's about a quilt and a postcard for a wedding present.
Oh, cool.
Do you still have the quilt?
And
Okay.
it was passed down to us before they passed away. So we still have it.
Is there anyone that wants to start? I mean, like, has a piece that, is yours like within a page or two?
Mine's very short, a little over a page.
Okay, well then let's start with you and then maybe you, Lois, because, so you shouldn't have enough time to hear too long. Because I think these sound like they might take a little longer.
Well, my voice is kind of lousy today.
Well, if you want somebody, do you want Danica to read it? Or would that be easier,
Let me try.
or? Okay, all right, you read it and then when you, if you want some help, let us know.
When my parents were married in 1942, they received a handmade quilt for a wedding gift. The quilt is a wedding ring design, a pieced-together quilt with a design of a series of 20-inch interlocking rings on a white background. Each ring is formed from a string of small 2x2 squares cut from a wide range of different colorful material patterns. The quilt is approximately 5 feet by 7 feet with a backing material of white muslin. It appears to be all hand-stitched, the front and back held together with carefully spaced tufts of pink yarn. The quilt shows little evidence of wear. A small tan stain is evident in one corner, but the material and stitching is sound. I don't think it was used much, especially in its later years. Mom treasured this quilt. She protected it by keeping it in a large plastic bag usually stored under her bed. As was common in their generation, both Mom and Dad were heavy smokers a good part of their lives. She knew what cigarette smoke would do to a quilt, thus the plastic bag. The quilt traveled with the folks through many moves to many ranch houses and to their final retirement home where they spent their last 20-some years together. The folks were married 65 years. As they grew older, they reached a point where they began to unload any personal possessions they felt they could do without or wanted to pass on. During one of our visits, Mom pulled a large plastic bag from under her bed and revealed the quilt. She explained its history, saying it was given to them as a wedding present in 1942 by Mrs. Beale, a friend whose family ran the service station in Clearmont, where she had attended school. I had not recalled seeing the quilt or knowing its history as a child growing up. I was surprised and touched at how much the quilt meant to her and honored that she was ready to pass it to my family and generation. A bit of research revealed that the wedding ring quilt pattern is a symbol of eternal love and unity, a metaphor for the unbreakable bond between a husband and wife. The wedding pattern has the reputation of being a very difficult quilt pattern. So as a gift from the quilter, it was no small expression of respect and support to a newly wedded couple. And who is to say that perhaps that quilt had something to do with Mom and Dad's 65 years of marriage. Today the quilt is draped over a quilt rack at the foot of our brass bed. Mom's efforts to save and preserve it paid off, and we feel it needs to be seen and recognized as a symbol of my parents' memory.
So comments about that piece, his writing piece, and then the piece as well.
I can, since I'm a quilter, I can totally envision what this quilt looks like from his description. And as a 5 foot by 7 foot quilt, it was made for one double bed. You're not a queen, you're not a king, but a simple double bed.
That's about what they had in those days, though.
Yeah, that was their option, single or double.
Or 3/4 rollways.
But bringing the purpose of the design
Mhm.
to the marriage, and then actually into your marriage as well. I mean, that was a real nice continuation of that theme.
and that the fact that it's still here and in good shape. You know?
Yeah,
I'm a quilter too, and so that's impressive.
you see quilts, you see this design quite a bit.
Yes.
In fact, I had it presented at the library quilt in 2 years, I think. I took it down and Vicky put it up for an example, I guess, with the old quilt.
So I do have one question. Do you know what the batting is in that quilt?
Somebody could probably tell us, I don't know.
Well, I have one from the same era from my Uncle Johnny on a farm that he had that was made from flour sacks. And it's all hand carded wool batting inside.
And it's heavy.
Yeah,
It
it's
would have
heavy.
to be really heavy.
And it's probably about a 3/4 size, because Johnny was never married. And the one thing I want to tell you is that quilt is starting, the fibers are breaking down, it's starting to rot. And take pictures of your quilt, because at some point in time, that fabric is gonna get so fragile that you won't be able to handle it.
Yeah, you don't want to throw it in the washing machine.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
so like I've taken pictures of mine, which is a churn dash pattern. And that's what will get passed on down to, along with my story of my Uncle Johnny Purcell and what I remember about him. Because the quilt isn't gonna survive another generation.
It has to be protected. So.
Yeah, so you have to have it in like a UV light.
Yeah.
And so and even then, I've had this stored away in a round tubular, I think they used to put flour in them, canned. And I've not exposed it to the light all these years and it's still breaking down. It's just, the cotton fibers don't last forever. The wool is pretty good still, but not the old flour sack
But it's
fabric.
My mother got 2 wool quilts during the Depression. And one of them she recovered. Yeah, I happened to get both of them. And I have one of them and I very carefully washed it in a wringer washer, but I didn't run it through the wringer. I took it out, put it in the clothes vest and carried it out, laid it over, hung it over the line and let it drip and dry that way. It was very, very light after I got it washed. It had been very heavy. And I think it collected dust over the years.
Oh, really?
And it
Was
washed.
that- How
And
much
my
dirt?
daughter says, that is mine. And so she took both of them, because I was going to recover it, but I thought, because the fabric still looked really good, and so I washed it very carefully and hung it. I think we had several clotheslines, 12 inches apart. My husband always put four lines of clothing. So I draped it over.
It kind of made it flat, so it
Yeah,
wasn't just hanging on that one hanging point, right?
And it dried, and it was so light and fluffy and warm.
I want to come back to the writing, and I think Lois pointed it out, but that ability to pull the importance of your object, whatever that is,
Uh-huh.
into a meaningful symbol, if you will.
I really liked the explanation at the end of
Yes.
what that meant. That was great. That was really, really good, and I loved it that you put that at the end. That was
Yes.
wonderful.
Yeah, I like the idea that there's just a whole lot of the details that you gave with regard to what your mother did to protect it. The whole idea of putting it, the smoking factor and the issues of concern. There are a lot of personal details that would added to a lot of that story that was there.
Yeah.
And
So you don't didn't sit out on any of the beds in your ranch living then, huh?
Probably not.
that's probably why it still survived, because
Yeah.
otherwise it wouldn't. Most of them. And somebody was writing a thing this week about a quilt that her mother had made, and she was talking about the uniform stitching, the hand stitching, and I was thinking about that whole idea that on the hand stitched quilts, they are as uniform often as a machine stitch, just it's different shape, different, yeah.
My sister Mary informed me that if you're hand quilting, it's 12 stitches to the inch. And that's the way she quilted.
Oh my word,
Those are
that would drive
That's
me
a lot.
nuts.
Yeah, it'd take a very fine needle to get that down, so.
I was
anyway,
thinking, one thought is maybe if you put a little bit of the description of the patterns that are in there to say, pull out some of the colors
Yeah.
or,
The little bit.
yeah,
The colors of
Things
that,
that's
because I'm assuming they
stand
were
out.
flower sacking.
yeah,
And a
against
lot
the
of
white
variety-
background,
Wide variety, colorful
Yeah.
stuff. Make up the ring on a white background.
Yeah.
Show up pretty well.
florals
yeah.
and pinks, because I've seen it, I think, right?
Yeah,
It'd be
you
neat to find out about the gal to see other quilts she had made, because that was out in Claremont. And they do a quilt show out there
Well,
too,
yeah,
so she's
well,
probably
they're
around.
out there, so.
Yeah.
And you said her last name was Beals?
Yeah,
I would be willing to bet money if she gave them that quilt, that she's one of the quilt, she was part of that original quilt group that's in Claremont.
Yeah.
Do you have a label on it?
no,
Yeah, you probably should, just for the sake of having the original name, so it's
Yeah.
found in that.
Yeah.
It's the provenance of it.
Nowadays, they teach you to label your quilt, what pattern it was, who quilted it, who pieced it together,
we talked about doing that.
and what
We are
purpose
really-
it was.
Good idea.
Just a record.
My suggestion is you take your story and you put it in a plastic page protector. And then you sew it to that page protector to the corner of your quilt, so it's always with that quilt.
Oh,
Did any of you go to see the quilts that are in the library?
Yes. Yeah, they're up until 1
There's
tomorrow.
one quilt in particular that, number 50, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if it isn't Cynthia Twain's, I'm not sure, but it's a picture. And I'm not a big fan of a lot of the photograph transferences on quilts, I'm not a big fan of that. But this one has transferences of several family members and a marriage certificate, and it has a blend of both modern fabric and historic fabric.
Wow.
It is quite a beautiful it's a really interesting quilt. And whoever had submitted it has a history attached to the
I saw
quilt
that.
that's by itself, and it's on it, it has the sheet protector, the paper protector so you can read about that family. And they didn't include names so that you're not gonna judge them, but I'm just looking at the photograph of the mother, the grandmother person. It looks like Jean Isley. So, and I don't think it is, I think it's her
That's
mother.
not fair, you have somebody's history.
Well, I'm just looking at that going, I think I wouldn't be at all surprised if that isn't who that is. But anyway, I think along those lines.
yeah.
Some of my stuff that I know they're gonna keep, like, I made custom-made baptismal gowns for every one of my grandchildren. The first one I made out of the wedding dress I made for my wedding. And in it, my sewing machine has lettering, and I write the date I made it, who it was made for, and my name. And I usually put that I'm Grandma Sears, so that they know what generation I'm from, and that's in a fabric label that then is sewn into a seam inside, so it doesn't ever get lost. And so it's marked. And I do that with my quilts too, or if I make like a quilted tree skirt for one thing, for a family member, I always put the labels in them.
There's probably somebody in Buffalo that would be willing to do that for you. Well, Lois, let's hear from you. You said yours is relatively short,
Yeah, sure.
and just want to make sure as many as we can.
So what will Aunt Marie give us for Christmas this year? My sister Jan asked, rolling her eyes and exaggerating her smirk as she pulled my younger sister Nora and me. Will it be 3 pencils each like last year, Jan offered? Maybe we'll get junk jewelry from the Salvation Army store, Nora said. Over the years of our youth, Aunt Marie had always come to the extended family party weighed down with unusual gifts for me, my brother Larry, and my 2 sisters, as well as our many cousins on my mother's side of the family. We could never guess what Aunt Marie would come up with, but we knew it would never be something to off of our Christmas wish list. Aunt Marie wasn't married and had no children of her own. Having worked as a very highly paid telephone operator for Ma Bell since the late 1920s, Having invested in AT&T stock right from the start, she was the one my mother and her siblings would go to float a loan. We didn't think of Aunt Marie as really rich, but we knew she had enough money for stylish clothes, travel excursions, gold jewelry, and other luxury items that her other 6 siblings could only dream about. Because of her comparable wealth, her gifts seemed laughably skimpy. As we'd been taught, we made sure to publicly thank her for each gift while snickering about her largesse among ourselves when we were among ourselves. One Christmas, I got a bottle of olives, another a bottle of ketchup, and still another a bag of pistachios. Although I didn't regard these as prized Christmas gifts, I realize now that even though her gifts didn't cost a lot, she took great care to buy each kid something they would like. For instance, my olives were the small green ones with the cheery red pimento stuffed in each one that I could eat by the jar. The ketchup was Heinz, the only brand I deemed worthy to lavish on my meat from meat to mashed potatoes. And the pistachios were extra plump and numerous enough to turn my fingers pink for a week. As I look back at old Christmas pictures, some of our biggest smiles were snapped as we showed off our year's crazy gift from Aunt Marie. On the Christmas when I was 12, in addition to our usual individual gifts, Aunt Marie presented a family gift to us Petersons to be shared by us all. The kids scrambled to unwrap the mysterious box and were surprised to see a sparkling gold bell nestled inside, topped with a shiny gold ribbon. Jan, being the tallest, stuck her finger in the hanger loop and hoisted the bell shoulder high for us to examine. Immediately, I reached out and pulled the pine cone that hung on a string from the bell's midsection. A beautiful rendition of Silent Night began to play from the music box tucked in the center. Everyone was still as we listened through several minutes of one of our favorite Christmas tunes. However, the song played on, and when it finally slowed and stopped mid-stanza, the usual Christmas conversations resumed, but only long enough for Nora to reach out and pull the pumpkin again. Again, the adults politely put their chatter on hold, and Mom covertly signaled to us to give the bell a rest. No dice. The next it was Larry who pulled the pine cone, resulting in some raised eyebrows and nervous laughter from many of the adults and some true guffaws from my cousins. There was a few scolding looks aimed in the direction of Aunt Marie as well. Not to be left out, Jan finally took her turn pulling the string. That was the last straw. Mom was off the couch like a shot, gunning for the now irritating music box, and we realized the bell was about to meet with Christmas disaster. So it would be out of temptation, Mom stashed it on the top of our 7-foot-tall china cabinet, far out of reach of us kids. The bell stayed silent for the rest of the day, and when we balanced on a step stool to retrieve it a few days later, it has disappeared entirely. After a few years, big Christmas parties morphed into gatherings of individual families and smaller groups. With less chaos and clutter came a loss of some of the silliness and fun. That is, until the year Aunt Marie's Christmas bell magically reappeared. Almost, but not quite buried by the other presents beneath the tree. Still boxed as it was, while relegated to the top of the china cabinet, we recognized it immediately. Mom was the only one to gasp and cry out, "Oh no." The rest of us were overcome with laughter and happy memories, each of us eager for our turn to pull on the pine cone again. Searching each other's eyes and priding each other for the truth, we were still unable to discover the master thief who had nabbed it and hidden it away all those years ago. To this day, we credit the spirit of our late Aunt Marie with a glimpse back on our Christmases of old and her gift of making Christmas simple, fun, and rich with laughter.
Well, that is really nice.
It's sort of an anecdote again.
It is an anecdote, but that's a wonderful incorporation. That's nice.
Does your family still have the bell?
I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know where it was hidden. I don't know who had it. I have my suspicions, but I don't know. Remember the closet I talked about, that those attic closets? I think it got hidden in one of those. But
Oh,
I don't know. I don't know what happened to it, but all of us, I think, we're having trouble with relics, except some of the farm people. I don't have any relics, or anything like that.
Well, you moved a lot.
Yeah, I'm not
And
where
when
my
you move
family
a
is.
lot, you don't
Yeah.
keep that stuff.
Yeah.
It's a lot. What are some of the things she wrote about that you really enjoyed? Something that it sticks with you as she was
I
doing.
can envision this big family gathering with the weird gifts from Aunt Marie. I can just envision the kids,
Trying to,
look at our olives, you know?
Jane?
it's just the fun of it, and then the kids, one after the other, ringing the bell.
Yeah.
They had to all take their turn. I mean, that's pretty much like kids.
Yeah.
Parade.
Yeah, everybody. So, Sam, what about you? What was something?
Yeah, the kids, you know, all lined up, they have to have their turn, you know, no matter what adults think.
Especially because of the adults, yeah. It's irritating my mother, so yeah, I had to.
Yeah.
What else
That was
was
good.
in the piece that impressed you, or the way she handled it in this story, as she said, an anecdote?
The description of her Aunt Marie was good, very good.
And back to the small gifts, you know, that we almost seemingly insignificant gifts. But I had an aunt that always gave us a pair of socks. But that was just something, you know, just a gesture.
She thought differently about giving gifts than everybody else.
Well, if it's thoughtful, you
Yeah.
know, it,
Yeah, she,
In my case, I
different
personalized.
opinion, I guess, is
yeah,
what a
and
gift would should be.
she, yeah, it didn't have to be expensive and stuff, and I guess I'm the Aunt Marie in my family now, because everybody else gave up giving gifts, and I buy all the goofy gifts I can find, you know, and I send them, and they don't have a name on them or anything, but they just do that, you know, that Mexican Christmas gift and all that kind of stuff, so it's goofy things like lighted up necklaces or just goofy things, but I just hated to give up the gift giving and the fun, I mean, the goofiness of that kind of a.
She's pretty faithful giving you
I
something
was gonna
every year, yeah.
yeah, you should just add that to the end of your story because I think that rounds it out. So
Yeah.
now you know,
I
That's
feel
an
like
they're
Aunt Marie.
continuing
yeah.
her tradition.
Yeah.
almost,
Yeah.
you
Picked
know.
up something from Aunt Marie.
Yeah,
And maybe make a couple of, think of some of the things that you've given, like you said, the Christmas tree necklace. But there are so many times that experience then in the transference, it's kind of like the wedding ring quilt. It has the quality of moving on to the next generation is really powerful.
Do you still have the music box?
I don't know where it went, no, it disappeared for a few years, came back, it was another laugh, and then I don't know what happened to it.
And are all of your siblings, do you all get together periodically, or?
You know, it's hard because I've lived so many places, everybody there gets together, I just don't usually make it.
And are your parents still alive? Yeah, I think that's the detail of the family gathering and people in there. I think that's just, I like that sense of the camaraderie and everybody has, in naming names, that is a helpful, your brothers and sisters and, that kind of stuff. So the eye rolling, that image is a good one. You've got a lot of character that's created in those details. I think that's good.
The mother's comment was really,
Yes.
Yeah.
you knew that she was at the end.
She's had it.
The patience is gone.
Yeah, and you incorporated enough kind of dialogue. We have a sense of, the personalities of people in that space. So that works really well.
And Marie was an oddball kind of compared to everybody.
She was an eyeball, but she was kind of a neat person.
But she
you
made the
remember her.
memories too, you know.
She's memorable. I mean,
Yeah.
So, well, all right. So we are right at 3:30. So we're kind of at a spot where we need to quit. But the new prompt is again, and some of you've already touched on it in your story. In some odd way, Sam's piece about the bug, the Volkswagen bug event, and has an element of historical events. But I just did a random list of some things that came to my mind. From April 11th to the 13th in 1892 was the Johnson County War coming to a kind of a crux. at the TA Ranch. In October of 1929, there was the great stock market crash that had the beginning of the Great Depression. My parents lived through all of the Great Depression and all the way through all of this stuff. And my dad's experience with the Great Depression was quite different from my mother's. They ranched, they did a lot, oh, and I forgot to put the flu epidemic, that also impacted people. But my mother's experience was they were extremely poor, and their experiences with the Great Depression were really interesting. I mean, she was colored by that in a way that we were still being impacted by it when we were going to school. My mother washed off the macaroni and cheese and used it in something else.
Oh my gosh.
That's how, her mindset was you use everything until it's used up, period, no matter what it was. So that had a huge impact on her. December 7th was a turning point for many of it, my parents and me, period. 89, I remember, this one is one I remember, sitting in my living room, crying, watching them take the wall down at the Berlin Wall. There was something about that moment that was just transformative to me, and I will never forget it was like a gut reaction to that moment. It just seemed like everything had changed. 97, our family sold the Occidental Hotel. We've had it for 80 years. In 2017, I had to be rescued from the ranch because we had a flood that it was crazy, and I had icebergs 4 feet deep flipping up on the creek, and there was water coming everywhere, and I couldn't get out, and that was kind of scary. And then, on and on, there are just so many things that happen. So what is an event in your life that is kind of a turning point or an anchor that that is a historic thing, and it might not be a nationally important historic event, but like in 1974, when the draft came to an end, my high school graduating class was suddenly not faced with going to the Vietnam War. Turning points for many people. So I want you to think about that event and the circumstances surrounding the event. Where was it? Who was there? Maybe you were there by yourself. Why was the event important? Because I think about, I kind of there are lots of events in the United States but why was the event important, and how did it change you? How so? Write a particular event and its effect on you and those around you, and develop it, if possible, if there was any such situation where you were with people, include dialogue. And sometimes you kind of make it up. You kind of think about, sometimes there's a punchline that the person at the family reunion always said, or it's the punchline of every story. But sometimes you just kind of create the dialogue of the situation so that people can imagine it. But help us see the situation, the details. I don't know if the back page, I think I gave you my original, so I don't have the back page.
Oh, that's weird, because I only saw this one, and I thought it looked short, but I figured, well, that
There's a
must
little
be
bit
it.
more on the back of the
Okay.
back. That's okay.
Huh.
But it's
Sorry.
more a case of just, this should give you enough to kind of go from whatever your historical event might be. You clearly have several that you could write about, or it might be your own. But that's what I want you to think about, because every one of us has something that's, if you will, a kind of a turning point. So that's what if you are working on something and this isn't relevant, don't do it. Stick to whatever you're working on. That's not the point of this group. These are to get you off center. That's my younger sister came with me to the writing group on Monday, and she said, I really just can't think of anything to write.
Yeah.
I have a blank page syndrome, and I just can't do it. I said, well, come with me.
Idea generating.
So I threw out this thing. The title of their prompt this Monday was, what could go wrong? How hard could it be?
Huh.
And I guess as soon as I handed them out, that Beverly immediately had a thought. And before she left last night, she read me a 2-page thing she wrote about making pie crust that my mother had shown how to do it. And what could possibly go wrong? It's a great piece.
And there were a lot of things, huh?
Well, my mom made it look so incredibly easy, and it was not. And Beverly does this great job of it. She's got a great sense of humor, but she said all it took was just, it snapped. So sometimes that's all these are. And if you have something else you're working on, that's what I want you to be free to do. It's not about sticking to the point.
I have a comment today.
Yeah.
When you were talking about this china cabinet, I had visions of your grandmother on the ship holding this thing together while it was coming to America. I don't know how she could have shipped that without breaking it.
It was shipped at a separate point because they couldn't afford the guy being 16 years old
Oh,
and
okay.
immigrants. It was more important to them at that time to get to America, become American citizens, learn English, which they never ever thought about speaking Swedish because true Americans don't speak English. But it was after they were married, which was a few months after they landed in America, and both of them working at the steel mills, 10, 12-hour days, they finally were able to save up enough to pay for that cabinet that we don't know who originally got it, but it was handcrafted and it was exclusive rosewood, but they finally were able to afford to have it shipped.
Okay, they must have packed it really, really well.
When things were shipped around the turn of the century, things were packed very, very, very well. Plus, things were built very, very well.
Yeah.
And so, this was a very precious family heirloom, and the shipping company was conscious of that. So it was handled with care and definitely tethered down in the belly of the ship. And, but yes, it actually arrived separately from them.
Okay.
When you look at some of the things like Haviland china and crystal shipped from Belgium and France and all that stuff came. When you look at what they packed it in, it was incredible how they packed it.
Right.
The paper that they would wrap it in and the boxes. And then when they said fragile, they really meant it. And they really did take care of it. I mean, the
I
transport.
think the shipping company's reputation,
Yes.
they wanted,
Depended on it, yeah.
they wanted it to get there.
Quality mattered.
Yeah.
And really, and you're right.
Hold
But
it
it's
together
the
and
strength of those
take care of
things
it.
in and of themselves.
It was expensive, particularly at the turn of the century, because shipping crates were custom built.
Yeah.
And they were built to protect the furniture and wrapped in the paper and actually in this case cloth also. It was quite a thing, and but it's not like wooden crates are now.
No.
But it was built so that that thing wouldn't move, and can't you imagine it coming all the way from Sweden, actually several months on the ship, finally getting to the port of Chicago, and things weren't unloaded from ships with care. They were dock workers. They just, they use the winches and swing it around and, how it's still in pristine condition
Yeah.
today is amazing. And there's,
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah.
Trying to give, not, yeah,
Oh,
paper collector, I
Okay.
give them back.
Sam,
to
I
people.
wanna hear about your Volkswagen.
Yeah, I-
accident.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
I don't
I'm
like to
looking
cut
forward to
people
that
short,
one.
but it's the only way we can.
This is kids, I
No,
mean,
we-
when we were all
We'll
running
go to the
around,
next,
there was
next
always
thing
at
and
least one kid that
lock
had
on our
VW.
always.
And we always were in the VW.
I have people
I went all over the big horn mountains. in a
I
VW
guess
when I was
Patty
16,
wasn't on there today,
17.
Did the snow
but
come in?
he ran into some kind of issue and
No, my dad kept it.
I need to
it stopped recording at some point, so I
My
started
friend had
recording.
one,
But
and he, as soon as it
Yeah.
snowed, come in the vent.
Well,
you
it's
know,
good
turn on
too
the heater,
because-
the snow would come in.
like,
Oh, really?
Gladys
Wasn't
here
probably
missed the
the-
first couple weeks, but now people can go back and see it afterwards if you miss a class, you know.
The heater
It's handy.
went- well, Volkswagen heated
Handy
up.
for that.
Ours never did.
I have a feeling
Uh,
that my friend had bought his more than second
Well, thank
hand,
you.
you know, and it was not in the greatest shape. But it was funny, and then he'd go down the street with his